Aaron, thank you very much for doing this. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing all right, man. Thanks for having me.
No problem whatsoever. I joked earlier that in a year where people are paying attention more to their own division and their own team than perhaps ever before because of the way the schedule is laid out, everybody is talking about Columbus. How would you describe what this season has been to this point?
Well, it's been a long season in the first 14 games. Is that what it feels like? Um, yeah, I mean, as I wrote today, they've been just drowning in their own drama. Win, lose, day off, doesn't matter. They've had already a huge trade. Player asked for a trade, big names coming and going. Max Domi gets benched his first game with the Blue Jackets. Now Laine made it to his fourth game before he gets benched. They had the just unbelievable. This feels like ancient history now, but the unbelievable ruling and the mistake that happened with the NHL and the off-ice officials in Columbus on Sunday, which I've never seen a penalty taken off the board midway through the kill. It's just crazy. It's almost none of this has actually been about the game of hockey. It's all been about the stuff around this team. And yeah, it's been a wild ride here, and we're just a quarter of the way into the season.
You watched the game in its entirety. How culpable was Patrik Laine in what was handed to him, which was the bench?
Yeah, well, I mean, I certainly wasn't benched by John Tortorella for no good reason. I mean, there were a couple of defensive breakdowns, big ones, one that led directly to a goal, one shortly thereafter that could very easily have been a goal, went off the crossbar. So it's not like Laine had a great game and this was a personal vendetta with John Tortorella. That's nothing of the sort. There were certainly breakdowns on Laine's part. I think the part that's surprising for a lot of people is you sit him for the rest of the second period, you have a conversation in the second intermission. I think what surprised people is that Laine, in a 2-2 game, a player who's had 3 goals in his first 3 games with Columbus, doesn't see the ice in the entire third period. On a team that's been starved for goals this season, that is a very, very bold decision. And, sadly, the Columbus kid, Jack Roslovic, scores an incredible goal, and it barely registers a bleep. It's a game-winning goal. It should have been the story by itself, I suppose. But it gets all overshadowed by yet another situation where the coach has benched a player, a star player, and where does it go from here?
As you are well aware, and as I pointed out earlier on the show, he's not the first player to be benched or be a healthy scratch this season who has a reputation. Travis Konechny, Anthony Mantha, those are just 2 recent examples. Why is it a bigger deal with John Tortorella and Columbus?
Well, I think it's just I think John Tortorella is a magnet for attention, anyways, partly by his own doing. I think it's the history there. Look who he's benched this season. Again, none of them without merit. Pierre-Luc Dubois, if you saw his last shift with the Blue Jackets, that was well deserved. And I think you could argue that one had a punitive element in it as well. In other words, the third period scratching for Dubois, you go, okay, that makes sense because that shift, it wasn't just a breakdown on his part. It was a total lack of competitive spirit. You cannot have that. But I don't think that was the case with Laine at all. But it keeps happening here, which is, John Tortorella's good copy. He's good post-game video a lot of nights. I mean, they sell ads. The ad rate for the post-game ad before John Tortorella's post-game interview shown on the local regional sports outlet here is higher than it is at other points in the broadcast, which tells you all you need to know. People tune in and they stick around for what John Tortorella has to say.
We are very well aware in Vancouver, even though he was only here for a year. Aaron Portzline joins us today. He is with The Athletic and follows the Columbus Blue Jackets, has an incredible piece that you need to read. The last couple have been great, breaking down everything that happened with that travesty, in my opinion, from a sports standpoint of what happened in the course of that game with Carolina and the goal that should have been
Oof.
disallowed. But I digress. I want to get back to John Tortorella. You said he's a good clip, that he's good ratings. He's also a good coach. That said, is he good enough to keep doing it this way, given the reputation that exists about him and the Blue Jackets and star players?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that reputation, I guess it doesn't really matter if it's fully earned or not. A reputation is what it is. But, some of the, it's easy to say, and I've heard it said that star players don't want to be in Columbus and they keep asking to leave because of John Tortorella. And that's partially true. Obviously, he and Pierre-Luc Dubois did not get along well. Dubois and his camp insists that the genesis of that trade request was not because he didn't feel he could play for John Tortorella anymore. It was not that. Artemi Panarin, who left as a free agent, absolutely loved John Tortorella, loved him, and would tell you this to this day. He had issues with Ryan Johansson. I think most people now looking at Seth Jones for Ryan Johansson would make that trade in a heartbeat. I think the Nashville Predators are seeing in Ryan Johansson some of the stuff that worried John Tortorella and the Blue Jackets. So it hasn't been a rush out the door because of John Tortorella. There's been Matt Duchene wasn't going to sign here. They didn't offer him a contract. He was purely a rental. A lot of this stuff gets thrown on John Tortorella fairly or unfairly, but there's no getting away from the Laine stuff. This is now he thinks it's not a big deal at all. It's just a player being scratched. I beg to differ. I think you scratch a player of Patrik Laine's ilk for as long as he benched him, and you've got a different situation on your hands.
So when you look at the team as it's currently constructed and with what you've seen so far this season, is Columbus good enough to be more than a feel-good story for a round, maybe two?
Well, yeah, and so that's been the question now for these guys for a couple of years. Are they good enough to be more than the welterweight fighting and trading punches in the heavyweight world of the Eastern Conference? I don't think it's out of the question that they have pieces here where they could go on a run. This should be a pretty damn good team, honestly. I know the way they're playing right now, they'll be lucky to make the postseason or even be in the race well into the season, because it's just really disjointed right now. And you're seeing a lot of performances on the back end, especially where they were so good, but right now Seth Jones has struggled in his own zone. Zach Werenski is injured now, but it was a real struggle for him. Their top four, they think, is as good as anybody's in the NHL, and they both pairs have really struggled. They've been overwhelmed some nights just getting out of their own zone. It doesn't look like the team it was built to be right now, and I think that concerns John Tortorella. He keeps using the word disjointed. It's the right word. They just have not clicked and have not been able to figure it out. I think lots of teams are having this issue. Everything's weird right now, but they're suffering it in Columbus big time, where they just cannot find their game.
And that's in the micro. That's this season. And then we look to the macro, which is everything we were talking about before. You mentioned Seth Jones and Zach Werenski. They both got this year and the next on their contracts, after which Werenski will be an RFA. Seth Jones will be a UFA. Do they need one of those players or perhaps someone else of prominence to plant a flag in the ground and say, this is where I want to be long term?
That is just absolutely monumentally important. It is. And I think Seth Jones is the player and the contract negotiation by which people will judge the wellness of this organization, quite frankly. And there were reports at the time of Dubois' trade, or at least speculation, that Dubois caught wind that Jones and Werenski weren't interested in sticking around long term, and so he decided he didn't want to be stuck here. Now, that both players, Werenski and Jones, have said that that's not true. Both have said they're willing to negotiate with the Blue Jackets. The Blue Jackets can sign Seth Jones to a long-term contract. That is a much, much needed bit of good news for him. But look at what's coming ahead this summer for Jarmo Kekalainen. He may be the busiest man in the National Hockey League as soon as the season ends. He's got Tortorella's contract expiring. He's got Seth Jones, who can sign an extension. Patrik Laine, who can sign an extension. Those are two huge names. Werenski's an RFA, but he could sign an extension as well. He's got to decide on a goaltender. Does he keep Korpisalo or Merzlikins? Both of them are UFAs after next season. There's no way he can carry both of those guys into UFA status. Can't happen. What is he going to do with the captain? Nick Foligno's got an expiring contract. Their sort of foundational defenseman, David Savard, is a UFA after the season. So this feels like a big transition year for the Blue Jackets coming, and nobody envisioned this season being as choppy as it's been so far.
Well, and as your lead described today, win, lose, or draw, it's going to be interesting, especially with everything you just laid out. Aaron, we'll have to do this again because of that. Thank you very much for your time today, and keep up the great work.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it. Talk to you soon.